Hello and welcome back to heat number 3, where tonight Massena, Lannes and MacDonald do battle in the contest of the greatest marshals. Joining me are two wizened veterans of this campaign, looking suitably dapper. Well, one of them's looking suitably dapper. Um, yeah, I was mean. You're getting used to it by now, surely, Sam. Sam Jolley joins us, curator of the Royal Logistic Corps Museum in Worthy Down, Winchester. Josh Provan also joins me, peering through his glass as though it's a telescope. Was that meant to signify logistics, Josh, or were you just doing that for dramatic effect?
I have lost my mind.
This would imply that you had a mind to lose in the first place, which
How dare you,
in my
sir?
case,
How dare you, sir?
well, in my case, that
I
was never
challenge you.
so.
I challenge you. This...
We should say Josh has had a very hard day of podcasting. And too much of the sun can have an impact on your temperament, it appears that too much exposure to a podcasting microphone apparently has the same effect. Um,
I've been
Podcasters of the world, take note.
influenced by the Marshals. I'm now very dramatic, and I now need to pistol you in some, you know, appropriately legalized fashion.
But Josh, surely you know that dueling between marshals is strictly forbidden by law, which means we'll just have to do it quietly when nobody's looking, round the back of a church somewhere.
I,
I'll send you details of my second in due course. So Josh, if you aren't familiar already, folks, is the master of the. Frankly, if you don't know this intro by now, then God help you. Master of the Adventures in History Land YouTube channel and author of Bullocks, Rain and Good Madeira on the Maratha and Jat campaign, and Every Hazard and Fatigue on the Siege of Pensacola, available from hellion.co.uk. Please buy direct. Don't give your money to Jeff Bezos. We open each episode with I don't know why Josh is dancing around. I am truly concerned for his welfare at this point. We
I'm seeing the Jeffrey Bezos song.
I don't know what that is, and frankly, we don't have the podcasting hours to delve into that particular rabbit hole. I promised you in the if you've listened if you hadn't listened to the first installment, sort your life out, people. Go back and listen to it. You've got Marshals to vote for. Go and listen to the others. But thank you for joining us for this installment as well. But if you didn't, if you listened to the first installment, you will know that we developed a parlor game that had very strict and precise rules that absolutely were not dreamt up off the cuff because I wanted an icebreaker to open the first episode, in which we played Guess Your Favorite Marshal, which is what every self-respecting Napoleonicist will be playing this Christmas. I'm going to trademark it and sell it as a proper game next year. No, I'm not. Who am I kidding? But anyway, it's a thing now because I've said so. But whilst we didn't really guess Sam's favorite marshal, we guessed her second favorite marshal because I'd spoiled that surprise before we even went on air. But we played the game in the first episode, didn't in the second, but we never got to my favorite marshal. So the rules of this are you get one question each and you're allowed two guesses. Who would like to go first? Sam, would you like to have first dibs on this?
My question is, have we covered them in episodes 1 and 2?
No, we have not.
Okay. Well then.
You realize you're giving the advantage to Josh here because you're going to make two picks and therefore whittle the field down even more.
But that's exactly how it was for poor Josh when we played it in the first one. So it's fine. It's just I will sacrifice myself upon my sword for you, Josh. Well, I have absolutely nothing else to go on now, so I'm just going to throw names at you. Is it my boy Lannes?
It's a strong contender. It is not, but a very strong contender. If we're talking second favorite marshal, I would probably just about say Lamb.
Ooh.
So you were close. Could you actually make it 2 for 2? Could you get the favorite marshal with your second guess?
Oh, I don't know. I'm just.
Or do you want to let Josh have a go first and then come in with a second choice?
I think it's only fair that because he's benefited from my question, I get to benefit from his question.
By all
Okay.
means, by all means.
But that might then mean that he takes the glory by guessing right. It's a dangerous game. See the jeopardy in this game of guess the Marshall roulette that you're engaging here. So,
Well,
you know,
then I'll just flip my table with the computer. You'll all get a massive crashing sound and then me crying in the corner. So it depends what you want, Josh.
I'm at your disposal. You may carry on or pass it to me as you wish.
Okay, I want your question.
Okay. Right. Is he one of the traitorous marshals?
define traitorous.
To Napoleon.
No.
See, I feel like that is your reading of what of whether he's a traitorous marshal, not as whether he is considered a traitorous marshal.
Or is it all a double bluff?
Well, we'll see. Is it Marmont?
It's not Marmont.
Ah,
So the door is wide open for Sam. I'm quite surprised that you two haven't got this already, actually.
Oh, okay. I mean, that doesn't really hugely help me a huge amount. My
don't
mind is
bother
going
on
blank.
that.
I'm panicking. I'm just going to go with
It's not.
You're going to go with who?
Massena.
Oh, no, not even close. Josh, final roll of the dice.
Well, let's see. Who do we have left here?
I'd have thought this would be obvious for you. I mean, come on, guys. You know it's not going to be Murat. I'll give you that one for free.
You're just jealous of
I
his glossy hair.
No, I'm jealous of his exceptional thigh game. That's what I'm jealous of. I cannot pull off breeches in the same way. It's just a fact of life.
No non-equestrian can. Don't feel too bad.
This is true. This is true.
Oh, right. No, I mean, no, it's not clear at all. I don't clear at all.
Oh, come on. Do you not listen to this show? Well, of course you don't listen to this show. You feature on
You
it in
rag,
most of the episodes.
you rag about all the marshals. I don't know which one you like.
It should be obvious.
Oh, it's who do you know?
No. What's the matter with you both? Bernadotte, the man
That
who
was mine.
wins.
That was mine.
You don't get exclusivity on it, Mr. Provan. The man who wins the Napoleonic Game of Thrones. No, it's not my line, it's Rachel Stark's line, but I'm quite happy to steal it regardless.
Fine.
The guy who turns around to Napoleon and says, do one, I'm going to do things my way, but he's not a traitor, as we will hear in due course from Napoleon's own mouth.
I
So there you
agree.
go.
He's one of my top two now.
There you go. So you two failed miserably
We did.
to guess the favorite marshal, or frankly the gobbiest commentator on the Napoleonic era ever to disgrace a podcasting mic, because I'm not known for toning it down when it comes to my opinions. So I don't know what the meaning of that is,
I
other than
disqualified it because for some reason I've lost my mind and I chose Bernadotte so for some reason I discounted him.
That's what I did. I was like, no, he couldn't possibly have the same as Josh. That would not be sporting. And it's not sporting, sir.
How
no,
dare you, sir?
look, if you consult the rules on what are we calling this game now? Guess
Yes,
the
I will
favorite
just
marshal roulette or whatever.
Oh yes, I will just pick up the voluminous the volumes of rules that we were given for this. Oh wait.
Are you saying
There
that
are
this
none.
podcast is imperfect, thrown together off the cuff, and badly thought through? Because if you are, you'd be entirely right. On that note, we shall proceed to business in Heat 3. Again, we are suffering from the fact that some folks sadly weren't able to come forward with their contributions. Much love to them and their families. But it means that we only have 3 in this heat. Massena, championed by Charles McKay. Lannes, championed by Graeme Callister. I'm surprised that Sam didn't let out a whoop at the mention of Lannes' name. And MacDonald, whose case is made by Clemens. We will start with Charles McKay talking about the child of victory, Andre Massena.
Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Charles McKay, and I have the distinct honor and pleasure today to make a case for why Andre Massena should be considered the best French Marshal. And I understand that Dr. White would like arguments, so I will skip over the narrative of Massena's storied life. And I think he has three areas in which he really excels as a marshal. The first is the energy that he displays. Anyone familiar with the period knows the first Italian campaign, and Massena is simply everywhere all at once. At no better place is that seen than in the days leading up to, during, and after the Battle of Rivoli. But also later in his career, in 1809, at the Battle of Wagram, he's given a complex order by Napoleon to disengage with the enemy, move south to protect the left flank of the Grande Armée, which he pulls off with stunning skill and energy, especially considering he was in a carriage, having been wounded from falling off a horse. Other of his contemporaries, General Foy, for instance, Marbeau, have also commented before on his energy and the sparkle in his eye. But there's also a tenacious side to the Marshal. That's best seen, of course, in the Siege of Genoa. It's a 2-month siege from the 6th of April, 1800 to the 4th of June, in which an Austrian army lays siege to the French. The siege was long, protracted. The Austrians had cut the aqueduct. There were no supplies getting in. And the strategic significance of Genoa was, of course, that it gave Bonaparte the time to get the army over the Alps and defeat the Austrians at Marengo. But without that siege, without that tenacity, it's unlikely that Bonaparte would have been able to succeed. The Battle of Aspern-Essling, another great example of Massena's tenacity in light of or in front of the entire Austrian army, managed to hold out for a couple of days until Bonaparte saw the better part of valor and withdrew the French army. Without Massena's steely presence, could have gone much, much worse than it did. And then, of course, the lines of Torres Vedras. Massena is put in charge of the army of Portugal, marches into Portugal, has no idea the lines are there, and comes face to face with just steely teeth of forts running multiple lines. And yet, he remains there not 1 month, not 2 months waiting for reinforcements and guns. He waits there 6 months before finally retreating. The last area where I think he's really remarkable is as an army commander. And this, he really distinguishes himself compared to his other French marshals. His shining moment was in 1799, before many of the French marshals had even become generals of division. He manages during the War of the Second Coalition to defeat the Austrians and the Russians and drive off Suvorov in the process. That's perhaps his shining moment, and he commanded an army there of 90,000 at the Battle of Second Zurich and all of the operations around that. But also overlooked is his contributions to the Austerlitz campaign. And though he wasn't at the battle, you may also remember that Archduke Charles was also not at the battle because Massena had harassed him and kept him from being able to rejoin the Austrian army. That's often overlooked. And then finally, of course, is the third invasion of Portugal, where he's at the head of 3 corps. Now, it's notable here that Napoleon could have chosen any marshal in France. Apart from the action in Spain and Portugal, the empire was relatively at peace. He could have chosen Davout. He could have chosen any of the marshals, but he chose Massena. And then finally, I want to mention something about Massena's perhaps bad timing or bad luck. Many of his signature accomplishments were overshadowed by other events that were either happening at the same time or mere months later. For instance, the Second Battle of Zurich, which secured France's borders from invasion, happened just a couple of months before Napoleon overthrew the government on 18 Brumaire. The Siege of Genoa, of course, made Marengo possible. The Italian campaign in 1805 was obviously overshadowed by Austerlitz. Essling, to a certain extent, by the size and grandeur of Wagram. the third invasion of Portugal by Napoleon's marriage to Marie Louise. And then, of course, Massena by that time is retired in disgrace, and he misses Russia in 1813 and 1814. And I think for that reason, many people overlook his accomplishments. Some quotes here from some folks that I think you might find interesting and might help seal the deal. The Austrian chief of staff, shortly after the Battle of Marengo, told Massena, "You won the battle not in front of Alessandria, but in front of Genoa." Wellington, during the third invasion of Portugal, said, "I do not know which was the best of the French marshals, but I know that I always found Massena where I least desired he should be." And then finally, the emperor himself on St. Helena wrote, "He was once a very superior man who, by a very special dispensation, possessed that greatly desired coolness in the heat of action. He came alive when surrounded by danger. Massena, who was endowed with rare courage and such remarkable tenacity, also had a talent that increased the greater the danger. When defeated, he was always ready to begin again, as if he was, in fact, the victor." And I think that's a fitting close for the dear child of victory, Marshal Andre Massena. Thank you.
The case for Massena, the child of victory there, made by Charles McKay. The guy who was everywhere all at once, regarded highly by his contemporaries, tenacious, energetic. Charles talked about the poison chalice. I mean, didn't quite use the word poison chalice, but I think it's fair to say he was given a poison chalice with the third French invasion of Portugal. But there's a big caveat that I throw in there. Yes, it was a poison chalice, but Busaco. What the flaming hell was he thinking about Busaco? Because if you go and stand there, you don't need to be a Napoleonic infantryman. You don't need to be facing battle. Just climbing the damn thing is horrific. I say that having done it. It's vile. And quite how the entire French army didn't just mutiny when they were told, yeah, you're going up that hill that is so steep that you can barely get up it on your hands and knees, because it's not a hill, it's a mountain. It's a mountain ridge. I am baffled, truly baffled, and that is a mark against Massena for me. Also, he's an inveterate looter, which doesn't go down well with me. But the thing I will say in his defense is that he comes closer than anyone to breaking Wellington on the open battlefield at Fuente d'Onoro. So clearly there is huge talent there. Now, that is not to say that your position amongst the marshallate should be dictated on whether or not you manage to hand Wellington's arse to him. But nonetheless, Wellington manages to beat quite a lot of well-respected names in the French army. So there's a useful yardstick there in terms of who comes closest to besting the guy and what that might suggest against a consistent opponent. So he is the child of victory, but there is the problem of his later career, and Charles makes this case quite neatly, right? That if you're going to look at the late career, bear in mind that he doesn't want to come back. He probably knows he's a bit past it. Is that perhaps the problem with considering Massena, that he's got a bad rap very late on that is very famous because of the British connection?
Yes, to some degree. Massena is well, first of all, it's a fairly strong case all around, I think, in terms of argument and case. Massena is one of the ones you would choose offhand as one of the top. Contemporaries thought so too. The thing about Massena is, we mentioned this in the first episode, is that he's one of the ones who's doing a lot before the Empire, and he does a fair amount during the Empire. And for one of the guys who is a general de brigade and general de division during the Wars of the Revolution, a little bit like, well, he's sort of like the bracket of Jourdan in that age group, in that sort of section of life. He continues to be a good soldier through the Empire, and a lot of them don't. He suffers from the fact that a lot of these earlier soldiers end up being thrown into Spain, and I mean, you can listen to the episode on Napoleon of Boney's Boys in Spain for the the write up of his performance in Spain, if you like. Um, he didn't want to be there. He wanted to retire, and but when he realized he had a fight on his hands, he gave a good account of himself. He should be well known for Zurich, and
Yeah, that's
for
true, actually. Yes, he should.
completely saving the French situation in 1799. And then for holding, I think, is it Milan or Genoa, through 1800, which provides this scope for the Marengo campaign. He's also brilliant because he's one of the few guys who understands Napoleon at a sort of at a different level. One of the first things he said, that little expletive almost frightened me. And at that moment, he seemed to completely understand everything there was to understand about Napoleon. And he has these wonderful quips about whenever Napoleon says something in his presence, he makes a joke or some sort of sly remark about it. It's hilarious. The looting is a problem with most of the marshals, not all of them, but most of them.
True.
They're conquering heroes. They're going into a place. They're going to take stuff for themselves.
I mean, Napoleon isn't exactly shy in taking
Exactly.
shiny things when he wants to. So,
And
it comes from on high.
yep. I'm very convincing case for a top tier of Napoleon's greatest marshals.
Absolutely. Sam, I don't actually know your stance on Massena. This is going to be an interesting one.
So I'm very undecided over whether the events of the Lines of Torres Vedras is a positive for him or a negative, because obviously it was spun as a positive in the sense of how long he held out outside Lines of Torres Vedras. But the Lines of Torres Vedras completely and totally bamboozled him. They probably would have bamboozled everybody. I'm not saying that they wouldn't have, because again, being former Royal Engineers Museum woman, Lines of Torres Vedras are unbelievably wonderful feat of British military engineering, British fortifications, working with the Navy to get signals up and running. Absolutely fantastic. So I can see the argument, the fact that he held out as long as he did is probably a positive. But then also I feel like in the last episode or the first episode, I can't remember anymore, but I said that with Soult, doesn't matter how well he did everywhere else, you can't forget the peninsula. And then I feel like I have to be fair and say that for Massena as well, but I don't want to.
And you're making a good point here, because there's an added layer to this, which is he looks at the Lines of Torres Vedras, and what does he do? He kicks the problem upstairs and he goes, "I need more men, reinforcements, please," and then doesn't get them. Well, not in anything like the substantial enough quantities, and then goes, "Yeah, I can't do anything with this," and then pulls back. Which,
I mean, that's a fair enough thing to do, to be honest. But no, I think Sam's made a good point there. The flaw in the case is, for me, was actually that as well. Maybe it's the argument, that it's difficult to put a positive spin on that, because it's not exactly as if he didn't have a choice in the matter. He could have just said, "I can't take that this season. I have to get the heck out of here," and headed back to the frontier. Instead, he decided to stay and observe them, see if there was an opportunity. It's definitely, that's with all the Spanish marshals. It's not like being there as a pass either. They make mistakes that Wellington can capitalize on. It's not like, I often defend them because they're dealing with a situation that they're not really well equipped for. A lot of them aren't good at independent commands. Massena and Soult were good at independent commands. So you would have expected Massena to have put on a better show like he did in 1811, rather than the show that he put on in 1810. So yeah, that's a good point. And it's a little flaw in what is otherwise a very strong case, I think, for Massena. From what I know about him, if you look at his entire career, he's a very good soldier, very good marshal, and certainly a great marshal. But it's true. It's true. You can't ignore the fact that there's a not good years, 1810, 1811 for the French.
I really liked the quote that I always found Massena where I least desired him to be. I thought that, I mean, that was that kind of got me. That made me go, oh yes, no, this is a.
It's a very Wellington thing to say as well. That's as
It
much
is,
as
isn't it?
Wellington would actually come and say, outright saying, I was worried about this guy a lot.
Yeah. And not to harp over old ground, but Fiente Donero, people go and I think there's an episode on Fiente Donero somewhere in the back catalogue. If not, no doubt Josh and I will cover it in the Peninsular War series in due course when we get there. But a good indication that even at that stage of his life, Massena was a wily individual and knew his way around a battlefield and knew how to exploit weak points, and very nearly kicked Wellington's backside catastrophically into a river, quite frankly. We're talking a couple of hours away from a shattering of, not even just a defeat, a shattering of the Wellington's army. Okay, so strong support for Massena thus far, but we are heading into dangerous territory because next up is Marshal Lannes, championed by Graeme Callister.
Marshal Jean Lannes, a Gascon of relatively humble origin, born in the same year as Napoleon, went on to become the greatest marshal in a constellation of military stars. As I'll explore in the next few minutes, Lannes was a first-rate tactician, a superb leader of men, a soldier of incredible courage, and one of the tiny handful of men who would dare speak truth to power and tell Napoleon what they actually thought. There were in the Marshalate some superb battlefield commanders, some excellent leaders, and some men with unimpeachable courage, yet none combined these military virtues as fully as Jean Lannes. His early career gives hints of greatness. Elected to high regimental rank by his peers in the Revolutionary War, he eventually commanded a brigade with distinction, then a division, then was promoted to marshal in the first creation in 1804. Napoleon not only entrusted him with a corps command, but frequently used that corps in a semi-independent capacity, often in the vanguard of the army, confident that Lannes had the boldness and aggression to press the enemy, combined with the operational understanding and circumspection to avoid endangering his command. Lannes was a brilliant tactician. On the battlefield he proved time and again his acumen in both attack and defence, showing instinctive understanding of terrain, a superb grasp of required formations, and a true master's eye for timing. In defence he was tenacious, brave and innovative. At Montebello in 1800, for example, he drew the admiration of the whole army when his heavily outnumbered division held off and then defeated a much stronger Austrian force. In 1807 he perhaps went one better, as his defensive tactical skill largely made the Great Battle of Friedland possible. As the Russian army tried to engage Lannes and his apparently isolated corps, the Marshal not only held them off against terrific odds, but skillfully forced them to commit themselves, meaning that when Napoleon's reinforcements arrived, there was no way that the Russians could get away. Although the Napoleonic legend subsumes Lannes' achievement into the wider battle, Friedland is, in many ways, as much Lannes' triumph as Napoleon's. But as much as any marshal, Lannes is also well known and well respected for his attacking victories, repeatedly demonstrating his excellent grasp of terrain, tactics and timing. He led from the front when it was necessary, but when it was not, he could mastermind an offensive victory better than anyone, bar perhaps Napoleon himself. We see this in 1806, when he won the brilliant individual victory at Saalfeld. His corps took on the Prussian advance guard, and with perfect timing, manoeuvre, and use of echeloned attacks, he destroyed the entire Prussian-Saxon force in just a few hours of combat. This opened the way, of course, for Napoleon to manoeuvre the Prussians into battle at Jena. Perhaps even more impressively, we see it at Tudela in Spain in November 1808, when Lannes showed his aptitude for entirely independent battle command. Appointed to lead a wing of Napoleon's army, Lannes managed to manoeuvre Spanish General Castaños into battle, and with almost textbook pinning and flanking manoeuvres was able to utterly rout the larger Spanish army for very small losses of his own. As a tactician, therefore, it is clear that Lannes was a superb commander, unfailing in defence, indefatigable in attack, and mostly a hugely intelligent manipulator of terrain, formations and timing that are so crucial in any great commander. None of the marshals, bar perhaps Davout or Massena, could boast a record of such independent success, and Lannes of course never suffered failures like Massena eventually did in the peninsula. Lannes' tactical acumen puts him in the top 3 marshals, but Lannes was also a superb leader of men, inspiring loyalty in subordinates and showing loyalty to them in turn. While soldiers respected Davout and had confidence in Massena, Lannes was genuinely adored by his men. At Acre in 1799, for example, such was their devotion to him that half a dozen of Lannes' men sacrificed themselves trying to rescue him after he'd been shot and wounded. Despite his commands being at the forefront of some of the most daring assaults and desperate defences of the early Napoleonic Wars, men who served under Lannes knew that he would never unnecessarily be profligate with their lives. They also knew that he would lead by example. A nice little anecdote that sums this up comes at Ratisbon in 1809, where Lannes called on his grenadiers to launch a bold attack to take the city by escalade. Twice they were repulsed, and with no volunteers for a third assault, the story goes that Lannes grabbed the scaling ladders, called out that he was a grenadier before a marshal, and moved to lead the assault in person. His staff, loyal to a man, followed, and the grenadiers, moved by the sight of their marshal, in full regalia, charging a city with a scaling ladder in hand, rushed after him, swept over the walls, and took the place by storm. And this leads, of course, to another of Lannes' standout qualities which sees him rise above the rest, which is his incredible courage. He was, along with Ney or Murat, the marshal most likely to be in the thick of the action, but unlike Ney or Murat, he was never foolhardy enough to charge in without reason. Lannes led from the front, not the rear. His disdain for his own safety was legendary. Wounds he amassed aplenty. Yet courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to allow fear to get the better of one. And this Lannes showed to the very end. At Aspen-Essling in 1809, officers near the marshal noted that he was unusually quiet, and that he seemed to have this premonition of death. But despite any inner turmoil, Lannes rode into battle, commanded his men with calm authority, and faced danger head-on. That his end came from a cannonball strike, while Lannes spent a moment in quiet reflection mourning the death of a close friend, does not diminish the man's legendary status. And finally, Lannes' courage was not only physical courage in the face of danger, but to have the far rarer moral courage to speak truth to power, whatever the personal risk. Until the end, he considered Napoleon a friend, and without fear offered a friend's advice. Blunt, sometimes unwelcome, but always honest. He was never disloyal, nor shirked an order, but nor would he accept pointless orders for their own sake. If Napoleon had called on his 3 best marshals, for example, Lannes, Davout, Massena, to burn Paris to the ground, loyal Davout would have obeyed without hesitation. Massena would have hesitated, looted some stuff, but done it anyway. But Lannes would have told the Emperor, in no uncertain terms, to fornicate off, and think again. His loss was a cruel blow to Napoleon, who was surrounded by yes-men increasingly as the Empire went on. Although Lannes' career then was cut short by his untimely death in 1809, the Marshal's brilliance burned brightly. He was one of the best tacticians of the era, almost peerless among the Marshals, but his qualities stretched far beyond that. He was a brilliant leader of men, an inspiration to those around him. He was as brave as any man in the army and never shirked from the fight, and he offered Napoleon what no other Marshal could or dared to do, a friend's honesty. And so I commend to you Marshal Jean Lannes, honest, unfailingly brave, an inspirational leader, and a first-rate tactician. Napoleon's greatest marshal.
Graeme Callister there making the case for Lannes. Is there even any point in coming to you for commentary, Sam? Are you just going to shout "Vive Lannes" into your microphone?
I mean, pretty much, but well, I would like to think that I could do a massive eloquent speech about Lannes, but obviously Graeme has already done that, so that's not my role. And thank you, Graeme, for doing my boy proud. I think taking into account my bias as well, there is definitely the chance that him dying young and early has meant that his legacy is sealed as a wonderful tactician and immensely brave, and the man who would tell Napoleon when he thought he was being an idiot, but would tell it in a truthful way without being disloyal. I think all of those things are they cement his legend because he died young. That you can't live in the what if world, but if he hadn't died, would he have then made some of the mistakes that I say the other marshals did, and would he have messed up here, messed up there? When it came to Waterloo, would he have gone and fought with Napoleon, or would he not have? I personally probably think he would have, but that's by the by. So I will completely and totally admit that his legacy is probably so beautifully strong because he died young, and because he was then popped in Les Invalides for 2 years and then moved to the Pantheon. But he was genuinely adored by his men, as Graeme said. He's a master tactician. He's immensely brave. He scaled the walls himself. How dramatically beautiful is that? And he survived that one. Okay,
Yeah.
take over.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit that, I mean, we touched on it already. Lannes probably my second favorite. And I'll tell you why. It's balls with brains. You know, it's some of the elements that you can admire out of Murat. Considerable bravery, that gung-ho lead from the front style, but in a considered manner. That the way that if Murat had demonstrated it, then I would have problems with my previous comments on Murat, because I mean, here's a guy who knows how to rock an ostrich feather and lead a cavalry charge in a considered manner. That would be a dangerous combination. So I like it. I also absolutely love the truth to power thing. I very much like the fact that Lannes is kind of a slightly rougher kind of type of individual. But above all, Friedland. Oh my God. Friedland is just staggering. And I think there are only a finite number of commanders across all of the nations during this period who could pull off a Friedland style battle. Now, Josh, you may disagree with me on that, but as may you, Sam, but I think you're probably going to lap up any praise that I push in Lannes' direction. But I think there are very few who could hold a candle to him on that kind of style. I mean, who else manages something of that ilk? I'm actually struggling to a degree. There aren't many names who would particularly spring to mind. But let me get your thoughts on Lannes.
He's legitimately famous for good reason. I thought the case was very strong that was put forward. I think that through the early period of the glory, he's the epitome of the glory of the Grande Armée, and it's quite fittingly ironic in a way that he dies in 1809, after the old original army has been ravaged through Eylau and then at Wagram. And he's almost the epitome of the old army dying, practically. You know, La Salle, so many generals and good soldiers who fought in 1805 and through the revolution, dying in those critical years are very important. As the greatest marshal, he is great, undoubtedly. He's partially great because he died the way when he died and how he died. He's a sort of a vanguard commander in terms of the place he sits in. Who else could have done Friedland? Probably quite a few of the marshals probably could have done Friedland, because you have to take. Yes, because the Russians were idiots.
That's Jimmy Chen talking, not Josh Provan.
I've done a lot of work with Jimmy,
This
and
is
he
true.
makes some good points. The Battle of Friedland is insane. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And as Napoleon said when he rode up, he said, "They will not allow us. They will not. Basically, we're not going to get this chance again." He said to somebody when he rode up. Friedland is a great moment for Lannes. It isn't an independent command, though, unfortunately. It's not even Auerstadt, where Davout fought on his own. I mean, if he'd stayed there longer, the Russians would have just clobbered him, because they'd have just all come over the river, and that's it. It's the core system working. he had enough men and enough brilliance to hold the Russians until the rest of the army came up, and then they trapped him against the river, and then it's Ney, and then it's Senemon with his ridiculous artillery and things like that. It's the problem with Lannes is that he dies when he dies, so you can't easily compare him with a lot of the other ones. It's like Saint-Cyr. He's made a marshal in 1812. Lannes died in 1809. What are you supposed to do with that? I rank again. He did. I don't think he had massive independent commands. Possibly in Egypt, he ran around a little bit. Very good at throwing himself over walls. I love turning to his men, placing a ladder against the thing and saying, I was a grenadier before I was a marshal. And that is just like, yes, I'll follow you over that wall.
It's very Napoleon in its style as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the beauty of the French marshalate. A lot of them are soldiers, and they can speak to soldiers like that. And every soldier knows you were a grenadier before you were a marshal.
I think at Arcola that Lannes actually picked up the flag and ran over the bridge before Napoleon did, and that's why Napoleon did it. I think.
Yeah, I don't know who picked up the stupid flag, but it wasn't Napoleon.
Everybody seems to have picked up that damn flag, quite frankly. I picked up the flag, and you can't tell me I didn't because you weren't there.
There's Augereau as well, who I don't think is in the running at the second. He's like there's a painting of Augereau with the flag.
Oh yeah. I think it was basically Lannes and Augereau both tried to do it, and then they had to retreat, and then Napoleon went, "Oh, that sounds like a great idea," and then obviously fell in the ditch, but then had the beautiful painting that I love.
Yeah. I have trouble with where we'll put Lannes, but he definitely deserves to be in the running as greatest marshal.
Well, if he doesn't win, I will very happily comfort him.
I think you might get arrested if you walk into the Pantheon and start trying to follow through on that pledge.
I was there the other day, and the gate was very, very small.
So if you do find yourself needing bail, then you know who to call. See, I disagree with you, Josh. I'm not sure I do struggle with where I'm going to put Lannes when it comes to this heat. But we shall move on.
Yeah, you've been swayed by the romance.
I have.
You have a little, because objectively speaking, there are other marshals.
But Massena's an inveterate looter.
So?
Well, that's just not acceptable.
All of these people are famous because they are legally allowed to slaughter their other human beings, and you're picking a hole in the greatest of Napoleon's slaughterers because they steal stuff too.
You may have a valid point, but I've decided that we do need to move on for the benefit of time, and that is in no way me struggling to find an apt counter. So the final installment for this heat is then MacDonald, championed by Clemens.
So first, let's address the most obvious point for MacDonald being the greatest marshal. Out of all the marshals, he has by far the coolest name. I mean, come on, people. But all right, with that out of the way, let's dig a little deeper, because there's much more to him to make an actual point. Most of the conversations about the marshalate focus on the military skills and deeds. So let's take a look at them first, starting by stating the fact that he, of course, wouldn't be ranked the top military mind of his time, because saying otherwise wouldn't simply be true to history. So I won't even argue for that, but there's much more to the bigger picture. Why not sharing the military genius with Napoleon, or arguably Davout? He time and time again proved during his career that he was a reliable commander. Some may, in response, point to his defeat at the Battle of the Katzbach and say that MacDonald was a wild card in battle, but I advise you to look at the whole 1813 campaign, because you will see that this defeat isn't an anomaly. In almost all battles not fought under Napoleon himself during the Germany campaign, the French ended up on the losing side, because exactly that was the Allied plan. avoiding Napoleon and beating his marshals. Of course, MacDonald takes part of the blame for the outcome of the battle, as he himself said immediately afterwards, but there was, like always, more to it. But back to the actual strength, his reliability is best shown by the simple fact that he was on many instances trusted by Napoleon himself with important, independent, and often incredibly tough assignments, in contrast to many other marshals, be it his role in the 1800 campaign, in which he led his army successfully over the Alps on an even tougher route than Napoleon's army did. The command of the northern flank during the Russian invasion, which did actually not collapse until the Prussians under his command made the famous, or rather infamous, depending from where you're looking at, peace with Russia, or in the all-or-nothing 1814 campaign, where MacDonald acted in some important instances more or less as Napoleon's deputy. He wouldn't have received these tasks if Napoleon did not trust in his abilities, which were not particularly flashy, but methodical. And he was hardworking, tough, and leading by example. Napoleon stated this himself as MacDonald led a bloody attack at the Battle of Wagram. He himself saw him through his telescope and repeatedly said, "What a brave man." Not the last time in my pitch I will Napoleon make my case for me. And that exactly is where MacDonald's greatness lies. He didn't need to be flashy. He stood out with other and more important qualities because besides being a capable commander, he was a moral person who always said what he thought was right. While that might brought him in trouble from time to time, it was also exactly what Napoleon was missing in many of these other marshals. So many of them were either so under Napoleon's spell and followed his decisions and commands blindly, or in other cases were more interested in their titles, careers, and wealth to make the right decisions. This was not the case for MacDonald. Of course, he was ambitious. I mean, you had to be to become a marshal. And the man thought a lot of himself, but he was certainly not a strong Bonapartist, and his core motivations were always guided by his moral code and what he thought was best for France. Again, perfectly summed up by Napoleon himself, as he said to Caulaincourt, "MacDonald doesn't like me, but he's a man of his word and of high principle, and he can be relied upon." You see that pattern, for example, in Spain, where so many other marshals went plundering through the countryside, some even wanting to become a king, only to return to France disillusioned by defeats and horrified by the Spanish resistance. MacDonald, on the other hand, disliked his time there for the simple fact that he thought the reasons of the war to be immoral and went as far as admiring the courageous resistance of the Spanish afterwards. You can only imagine a scenario with which Napoleon wasn't surrounded by so many yes-men, but morally determined people like MacDonald. Maybe a disaster like Russia could in the end have been avoided. But I don't want to drift up into what is. 1812 happened and the consequences led to the end of Napoleon's reign, in which, of course, it was MacDonald who stood out with his qualities, confronting Napoleon together with Ney, moving him to abdicate afterwards, caring for army personnel mistreated by the returning Bourbon royalty. Fitting, Napoleon said to him in the last meeting, "I appreciate your loyalty too late." So, considering the title of Marshal was not just being a good strategist and seeing what MacDonald brought to the table, there is no doubt that his outspokenness, as the king later nicknamed him, here again with the awesome names, shined bright next to his fellow marshals and could have been even greater if his value was recognized earlier.
Clemens there making the case for MacDonald the outspoken. I'm not sure I was necessarily swayed by coolest name. It pains me to say this, but I think Murat might win the coolest name prize. Sorry about that, Clemens. Also, I used to work in McDonald's, so prejudices fully disclosed on that score. I mean, there is a problem in what Clemens himself freely admits, not the greatest military mind of the time, which when you're considering these guys for their records, at least in part, as military men, that becomes problematic. Yes, he was unquestionably reliable. Sure, he was hardworking and tough and principled. But I just don't think he quite stacks up compared. I mean, especially within the context of this heat. Does MacDonald eclipse Massena, for example? I like MacDonald, don't get me wrong. I mean, I don't want to be unpleasant towards the guy, but he's not a Massena, and he's not a Lannes, and he's not a Ney. And this is perhaps the problem, that he doesn't rank in the same. In a previous episode, Josh, you talked about the different tiers, your God tier, your Jesus tier, or whatever it might be. And I'm not sure he makes the Jesus tier, far less the God tier when it comes to the Marshals. That's my feeling anyway. Sam, let me get your thoughts on that first of all, and then we'll come to Josh.
I am going to admit to having never read anything about him before today, which probably says it all, really. Sorry.
Okay, so we have a judge who is freely admitting to a lack of knowledge on the subject that she's judging on, but there is something in that if I mean you're an avid reader on this period, if he's not really featuring in what you're reading, that actually does say something in itself. Josh?
Difficult. And it's a difficult heat for MacDonald. He needs all the help he can get.
He does.
It's nothing to do with it's a very valiant case put forward. He's famous for being
Having a farm.
Yeah, and knowing the sounds of animals. Can
I just say, this is the quality of highbrow analysis that you get on the Napoleonic Wars pod. MacDonald had a farm and his animals went E-I-E-I-O.
Yeah.
If you are wondering whether or not I made wise choices in terms of my judges, please keep those comments to yourself when it comes to
like we care.
I must say, we've done 3 of these back to back, and it does seem to have broken the redoubtable Josh Provan to a degree that I've never before seen. But in fairness, we have recorded for 3 hours straight now, so we are.
This is just me warmed up. Usually, I'm like just getting going by the time we stop. So,
okay. Anything that you want to say in relation to MacDonald though, and his case? I mean, Clemens fought very valiantly, with some nice humor in there, and there are good points. This is a principled guy. He's part of the revolt of the Marshals. That does appeal to me. Biases fully on display there, but I passionately believe that there comes a point where the revolt is needed. There comes a point when Napoleon is not the answer for France anymore. That point might have come in somewhere around 1807, but that's by the by.
He sounds like a good man. Like he sounds.
Yes.
We come back to that point of integrity again, and he sounds like a good man. The fact that he always said what he thought. I mean, that's exactly the same trait that Lannes had. He didn't need to be flashy. I mean, I don't think you can really get away with not being flashy as a marshal because your literal uniforms are flashy. But I get that he's not extra flashy in addition to that. In like maybe a little dig at people like Murat, who he's getting shade from all angles in all episodes.
Yeah, but legitimately, so because it's Murat. So I'm very sorry, John. You've done a great case in favor of Murat, which we will hear in the next episode. But
I'm very much looking forward to it. I quite like it. We all know I quite like a little bit of flashy Murat.
you do indeed. But back to MacDonald. I suspect that we're all kind of coalescing around the same point, which is good, but not great. Is that a fair point?
Definitely. He in a weird way, I think it's quite an apt thing to say about him that his name is probably one of the things that people know about him at all. It's because of his name. Of all the lists of the Marshals, they're all very French. And then MacDonald, like the first Marshal's name I knew because I have Scottish heritage, was when my dad or granddad said, "Hey, there was a Scottish Marshal." I was like, "What?" But not a lot of independent command. Very trustable within the eyesight of the Emperor. Big deal at Wagram, and tended to stick to what he believed as in 1815. Very interesting, but like you say, I don't think he's going to need a lot of help in this tier.
I think he absolutely is. Paul MacDonald, valiant effort there, Clemens. Taking on one that you knew, especially when we discussed, and I started dividing these up amongst people. Clemens knew he was fighting a hard, he had a hard-fought engagement ahead of him. I can get words out, honestly. Okay, let us proceed then to voting. And again, we will do this live on air because it seems to work, actually. Nothing gets thrown, although with the dogs that some of us have in this fight, maybe that will change when it comes to round 3. Because I have to have the casting vote, I'm going to have to keep stum on this. And I think we're going to go for the least enigmatic of the likely rankings on this. I hesitate to describe Sam's choices here as obvious, but I don't think there are going to be any great surprises in how you've ranked these 3, Sam.
Absolutely. Number 1 is my boy, the almighty, the
MacDonald?
good old Lannes, good old John Lannes. Oh, and then Massena, and then MacDonald. Yeah, I feel bad. I feel bad for MacDonald. There's something not sitting right there with me. There's just something not sitting right.
There's more to the story of MacDonald, but unfortunately, we don't have the time, nor does MacDonald have the weight for us to see it.
Indeed. Okay, Josh, let me get your ranking. I think you're going to go for Massena as your
Yes,
top pick.
it's Massena, Lannes, and MacDonald.
Okay, so we are all agreed in terms of who's coming third, at very least. Apologies, Clemens, but hey, it's a valiant 3 points there. But Josh, I have bad news for you, matey. As the casting vote, I'm afraid I'm overruling you. I do take the point about independent command. And it pains me to say
On
this
multiple levels, because Lannes did not save the French army at Zurich.
Oh, now you're making me waver. That's dangerous.
Go back.
Oh yeah, you have got a point, haven't you? I might perhaps be guilty of thinking too much about the Peninsular War and not enough about the pre.
But Lannes inspired his men on a personal level. He went over the wall.
Massena helped win a battle in a carriage.
Yes, but he also gave orders for the Battle of Busaco from his bedchamber. So
you have issues with Busaco, and I understand them, but I mean, it's one part. It's the end of his career, not like all of it.
Yeah, that is fair. Do you know what? You've changed my mind. I'm going to switch my decision on the final 2. There you go, people. Democracy in action. I have been swayed. Sam has thrown her glass across the room in utter disgust. She feels bereft, robbed. But I tell you this, if Lannes doesn't win this heat, I will be arguing vociferously for a wild card because he needs to be in the final session for me. Yeah, I think Sam is probably going to murder me for having made this judgment, but that is my decree, and it is final because this is a Bonapartist dictatorship on this show. Massena comes in at number 1 from the judges. Lannes comes in a very tight number 2, and MacDonald 3. So 5 points Massena, 4 points Lannes, 3 points MacDonald. But remember, folks, that is only one part of the story because you can also sway this via the public vote. If you are on Spotify, have a scroll down and you will see that there is a voting tool below. If you're not, don't sweat. You can head over to YouTube where you just need to type in your comment section, who you're backing. Feel free to explain why. That's part of the fun. Feel free to drop a like and subscribe while you're at it. Hashtag ad, hashtag shameless plug. But if you are on Twitter, please do head over there. Details will be in the descriptor where you can vote in the online poll as well. A huge thank you, as ever, to my judging panel on this one. Sam Jolley, creator of the Royal Logistic Corps Museum, Worthy Down in Winchester, and Josh Provan, master of the Adventures in Historyland YouTube channel and author of Bullock's Grain and Good Madeira and Every Hazard and Fatigue. You've been an absolute joy as ever. So there we have it, round 3, where Lannes has fallen at the final hurdle in what I thought before this episode was going to be a clear run for him. My second favourite Marshal, but not necessarily quite the greatest. We shall see how this drama plays out. A big thank you to the fans of the show who have pitched for this. Charles McKay making the case for Massena persuasively. Graeme Callister being equally persuasive and passionate when it came to Lannes, and Clemens valiantly flying the flag of MacDonald. Folks, you have been listening to the Napoleonic Wars podcast. We will return with 2 more heats very soon. Folks, if you've enjoyed this show, please do me a favor. Head over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave a 5-star review. If you're not a regular listener, remember to hit that subscribe button so you can find your way back. All of those things are incredibly powerful in helping this show to reach a wider audience. Much love, as ever, to all my Patreon supporters. Shout outs to my Mentioned in Dispatches patrons, Rob Griffith, Brendan Teeling, Beatrice de Graaf, Lynn Dawson, Jamie Kingston, Lucy Tatner, Jim Deary, Josh Keeney, Colin Fieldhouse, Stephen Coulson, Jim Getz, Stephen Gillen, Hugh Brennan, Alistair Campbell-Grieve, Andy Meakin, Mark Anscombe, Rob Coughlin, Bruins Girl, Noah Fink, Mark Trowbridge, Miles Reedy, Nick Overland, Graham Goodwin, Chris Pramas, Anthony Gumbau, Anonymous American, Martin Pisani, James Fluick, Natasha Hobday, Rod Schwager, Chris Kimball, Gary Dennis, David Graylick, Ted Andrews, David Milinski, Richard Anderson, Arthur Forgy, Sam Moore, Wyatt Pollock, Carol Dixon Smith, Roland Shark, Giovanni, Jean-Baptiste Merlon, and Darla Vincent. And the Admirals, John Haynes, Ryan Diamond, JC Kaiser, Bob Burnham, Mike Guest, Liam Telfer, Todd and Ned Campbell, Rachel Stark, Mark Duckers, David Maxwell, David Priest, Graeme Callister, Sean Sullivan, Stephen Ashworth, Dan Hazelwood, Kate Walcombe, Clemens Bemman, Charles McKay, Reto the Sci-Fi Fan, Tim Day, Mark Chestnut, and Jason Morn. I'll be back very soon, but until then, I'm Zach White. This has been the Napoleonic Wars Pod. Take care of yourselves, my friends. Stay well, stay safe, and as always, thank you for listening.